We are alive with the breath of life. Oh my God.
Yes.
You know, life, I've been thinking about this because I actually spend time with people as they are dying. You know, we had adolescence, we had toddlerhood, we had different stages of life. There's a new stage of life now. It's called dying. It takes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. It's a stage of life, dying. And so, as a minister, I have the privilege and the great blessing to be able to be with people at that time of life. And I've learned so much from these people. And what I've learned is that life is a series of deaths and rebirths that lead up to our ultimate death, the death of our body. And how well we navigate those smaller deaths, those littler deaths throughout our lives, the loss of our freedom, the loss of a job, the loss of a marriage or a relationship, a friendship, the loss of our kids as they move on, and we have to reinvent ourselves and be reborn somehow in who we are in this world, in this life. How well we negotiate the little deaths in our lives influences completely how we feel at the end of life. Those people who don't navigate those transitions and losses throughout their lives well get to the end of their lives, this is my experience, and they find that they are regretful, resentful, fearful, and incomplete. That is no way to go into that dark night, to feel that way. And so a big part of, even though our sermon topic is God, for 4 weeks, we've got a series going. Last week was God the Adventure, and we talked about God being a journey and the joy of discovery on the path to finding what is true, what is real, what is authentic to us. Today is God the Funeral, which I'm looking forward to sharing some ways in which a funeral can be a metaphor for how we can understand God. We're going to go on to God the Marriage, and then Bishop Carlton Pierce is going to be back here on December 26th after Christmas and deliver God the Birth. So you don't want to miss that. Bishop Pearson delivering the baby the day after Christmas. So you want to be here for that. It's been a great, and I've really enjoyed sharing that with you. And so today, God the Funeral is about those times when God seems silent, when we feel abandoned by God, like there is no God, like God has died. That's a tough time. I've been there. I don't know if you've been there, but I have been there in those dark moments when it seems like there is nobody and nothing to hold me. When I feel like a motherless child, like I have no friends. Now, I want to say I was meeting with one woman not that long ago who was down in hospice, and she was talking to me about her relationship with God, and she said when she grew up, when she was a child, she loved church, she loved God, she loved Jesus. Jesus was in her heart. She prayed regularly. Church was an important part of her life. And then, when she got to be a teenager, and she got into high school and grew up and became a young adult, she looked around and said, where is God? Where is this God that I've been worshiping, thanking, praying to? And she just sort of lost touch with that God. And now, 80 years later, she's in her 90s, this woman who I was talking to, she was saying that as she laid there contemplating her death and the end of her life, she felt that God had given her a message. And the message that God gave her in that moment was, I never abandoned you. I never abandoned you. And first feeling was joy. God is with me. God's always been with me. But there was a second feeling, and that was a little bit of guilt. You know, here God has blessed me with children and family and a husband and chances to travel and get education and do all these great things. And I sort of, you know, I could just imagine seeing God and God being a little disappointed. What, you couldn't see me in all those blessings, that I'd abandoned you? Look what I've done for you. And so it was kind of a two-edged sword in a way. And so we've talked about that, and this sermon is somewhat born out of that idea that one of the deaths that we deal with is often the death of God, or the idea of God that we've held in our lives. Because when we're 5 years old, 7 years old, in 7th grade, we have an idea of God that's very concrete, based in what we've been taught, based in what we can understand at that time. But then as we grow up to become an adult, we start, if we think of God just like that, like the man in the cloud with the beards and the lightning bolts, we start to say, that's not making sense to me, that's not working for me. But then the question is, do we give up on God? Or do we find a way to see if God can be reborn in us? An idea of the truth and the sacred can still mean something to us as an adult in a way that's authentic and real for us. Not something we're not copying anyone, we're not faking anything, but something that's real for us. Can we listen into that aching silence and hear something? So that's where this, and I sort of want to start with a story that I've told before about a man who lives in a village. And in that village, there's going to be a big flood, like a Katrina-sized flood. And so a truck comes along, and it's going through the village, honking its horn and saying, there's going to be a flood, we're evacuating the village, get in the truck. And people were piling into the door, they were going off. But this man said, no thank you. I'm going to stay here. I have faith in God, I trust God, and God will save me. And so they tried to convince him, but sure enough, they had to go on and save the people who would be saved, and he stayed there. Well, the rain came. And the rain started pouring down, and the rain filling up the whole village. And he's climbing up a ladder onto his roof, and he's standing on his roof, and the water is right here, and a boat comes by, and the boat driver says, hey, come on, hop in. The water's not going to stop. The rain is still coming. You're going to die. We need to get out of here. You need to get out of here. And the man said, no, thank you. I have faith in God. I trust in God, and God will save me. So after arguing for a while, the boat went on. Then finally, here he was up on the chimney on top of his roof, and the water was up to his neck. And a helicopter came by, and it dropped a rope ladder to him and said, grab on, hang on, we can save you. And the man said, no thank you. I pray to God, I trust in God, I have faith in God, and God will save me. A few minutes later, the water went up over his head, and he died. When he got to heaven, and he said to God, God, what have you done? I have been a faithful servant. I have witnessed to you. I have praised you. I have done everything that I have been told to do for you, and this is what happens to me? God says, my friend, I sent you a truck, and then a boat, and then a helicopter. What more could I do? When we are so certain that we know who God is, what wants, it can lead to death. We need to stay open to the possibilities of God. Whether we think we know what God is or isn't, we need to stay open and remain open to the possibilities. I don't know if you watch football, NFL football. I like a little football myself once in a while, and there's been sort of an issue. You know how people in sports, they're always thanking God for, I see these boxers and they've just beat somebody to the pulp. They're bloody. They're on the ground knocked out. And they say, God did it. It's all because of God. Thank you. And I'm thinking, it's ironic. I imagine the other boxer was praying to God too. I don't know about all that. But so in NFL football, there's a lot of that. And recently there was an issue with Steve Johnson of the Buffalo Bills. I don't know if you watch football. They were playing Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was highly favored. They went into overtime. A pass came to him right into his hands, and he dropped it. In the end zone, in overtime, Pittsburgh got the ball back. They ran it down, scored, and they lost. But Steve Johnson knew who to blame. He fingered the culprit. God. In a Twitter, I didn't know God read Twitter. But hey, if God can do everything else, then God can read Twitter. So can you just put that up? He Twittered after the game to God. He said, I praise you 24/7, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, and this is how you do me? You expect me to learn from this? How? I will never forget this, ever, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Thanks, though. I love that. But if we give God credit for the touchdowns and the victories, then we got to give God the blame when God blows it. Is he right to call God out? You know, the late night comedy channels have been having a lot of fun with this. That is when they're not having fun with the Oklahoma politicians, because they've been having a good time with our folks as well. Steve Colbert said, let's be honest. Come on, we're all thinking it. Maybe God's past his prime. You know, maybe God can't win football games anymore. Maybe we need to take personal responsibility for our own lives. You know, I don't think God is that interested in NFL football, at least not in the regular season. The point is, what do we do when the God of our understanding lets us down? When the God that we believed in, that we held on to, that we were so sure of, doesn't come through, then what do we do in those moments, in those times? We could fire God, just like the Dallas Cowboys and the Minnesota Vikings fired their head coaches mid-season because they couldn't win football games. We could fire God and just say, you know, I'm done. God's not real for me. I don't need to pray. I don't need to praise. I don't need to do any of that because God hasn't come through. We can do that. Now, we call this in theology, we call this a theological impasse. When your experience does not with your theology, with your ideas of God, when that happens, it's called a theological impasse, and you have some choices. One is to just keep believing anyway, just like you were. Another is to stop believing altogether, and the third is to become a theologian. You know? Like Bear, you know, he's sort of moving in on my territory. He's starting to talk theology. But really, to begin to think through what could God mean to me now? What is God? What is this that we mean by the word God, that we mean by the word truth? What could it mean to me now that makes sense, that's authentic, that's real, that I could hold on to? Not because someone told me, not because it's someone else's idea. There's an powerful story from the Holocaust. During World War II. There was a group of Jews in the concentration camp during World War II. It was the most awful, despicable time in the lives of the Jewish people and you know, as much as any human beings could experience. They were gassing the children, the elders, the wives, anybody who was sick, killing them before their eyes. So this group of Jews in the concentration camp, I believe this is a true story, they decided to put God on trial. There were 3 rabbis in the camp. One of them was the lawyer for the people. Another one was the lawyer for God, the defense attorney. And another was the judge, and the people were the jury. It went on for days in the concentration camp, each side making its case, until finally a verdict was rendered. And it was clear, and it was unanimous. God was guilty. An incredible silence, a haunting silence just stood over the people in the concentration camp. And after a while, somebody said, well, to the rabbis, what do we do now? And the rabbi said, we do the only thing we can do, the only thing that makes sense in such a situation. Let us pray. And they prayed, knowing that in the end, ultimately, God can't be guilty, but it must be their misunderstanding of the great mystery that holds us, the great source of our lives. So they became theologians. They began to pray and listen into that aching silence, that void, to say, who are you? What are you? What is real and what is true? And they held on, ultimately, to their faith in God. But it wasn't the same God. They realized that the God that they had believed in was really a God. It wasn't that it was a false God. It just wasn't all of what God is and can be in their lives.